What's up, everybody? Or nobody, since I don't think anybody's watched my first video, but that's okay. You know, this will be out there for theoretically ever. So perhaps somebody will be listening at some point. It's definitely possible. I hope you listen to the following podcast I did with my grandmother. It was very fun, and I'm listening to it now about 40 minutes in. It's I think it's an hour and 40 minutes or something like that. Yeah, just listening to it while I was doing some laundry. And yeah, my grandmother has a lot of knowledge, a lot of opinions. Obviously, some of which we all agree with and we all probably disagree with. So, but I think it's interesting to listen to her nonetheless. I did have some thoughts about it, but I don't know if I necessarily have the time to go over that right now. Plus, I don't think anyone's necessarily even interested in that yet. But at some point, if people listen to this and they're interested in discussing further, I will let you know. But for now, I hope you enjoy. Yeah, an hour 45 minutes of politics with Suzie Burke. And yeah, if you're in the Seattle area, Washington area, or if you're interested in politics, or if you're interested in, let's see, what else? Probably if you're interested in Suzie. There's a lot of people interested in my grandmother. I'm one of them. Yeah, not much more to say. I don't think much more needs to be said. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, let me know. Enjoy. Okay, we're live.
Hi there.
Got a special episode tonight. We're filling out a Washington State election ballot. My election ballot.
Do you want to start with the people or with the measures?
Let's start with the measures.
Yeah, they're usually more confusing. At least people you usually have some thing with.
Okay.
Okay. Well, and by the way, it shows right here how you can change it if you decide to change your mind, but not after you mail it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, referendum 90. This is a biggie because the people of the state of Washington had to go referendum something that was passed in the last 2 days of the legislature. And in case you don't know, it is hard to get a referendum through because you need a certain percentage of all the people in the state who voted in the last election, big election like presidential or governors. But ours are the same one. So we needed 128 or 130,000 signatures to get this on the ballot. The people of the state of Washington got 266,000 signatures and got it on the ballot in the middle of COVID, which was, nothing's ever been done like that before. They wanted to get it on the ballot to reject it. The legislature had gone in the last couple of days of the legislature, did not really have any hearings that people wanted, and decided that on the basis of the superintendent of schools and the governor wanting to, that there would be a sex education mandate for every school in the state of Washington that was going to have to do sex education the way Chris Reckdahl, the superintendent of schools, wants it, without any ability of the parents and the local school board to decide for something else.
So as it is right now, the local school board gets to decide what the curriculum is regarding sex ed.
Yes.
So
And
that's for each school. They get to decide.
each school district.
Or each
Usually
school
the
district.
But, they all have something. But the other thing about this was it had to start in kindergarten. And that really bothered some people too. Because when the details of what was in it came out, they were not things you necessarily wanted to teach a kindergartner.
Mm-hmm.
But the biggest thing was something like this should be handled locally more than at Olympia, because closer to the people, more able to work on it, right? That's kind of a truism in our whole government, is if you do it the closest jurisdiction to the people should do the things that affect them the most.
I think that's how you and me think, for sure, and how a lot of people think, but that's not how also a lot of people
It's not how
think.
most politicians think, because they just soon have the control in their ballpark. But from my point of view, I think most people believe that they want to be in charge of little things like sales tax, things that really affect them.
Or what your children will learn.
What your children will learn.
Yeah.
Sex education for your children.
So this referendum, if I'm understanding you correctly, was there was some sort of petition to get signatures, like 200,000 signatures.
266,000 in the middle of COVID, when nobody could get together with anybody. It's a major
To reject this.
Well, you get to approve or reject. The nice thing about putting something on the ballot is all it does is put it on the ballot. You get to approve or reject.
I don't understand. So what are we approving or rejecting?
The thing that the state legislature already passed.
I see.
If you don't reject it, it's automatically in place next January.
Okay.
So people, if they like it, they just approve it, and it's in place just the way the legislature voted it.
Mm-hmm.
But if they don't like it, want something else, they reject it, and then the legislature can start over. It's not like it can't be done, but maybe they'll have some hearings and talk about how people feel about their school boards closer to home.
Now, is this the same one that I was looking it up, and there were a bunch of things in the, what was it, a bill, or what was the thing that the Congress passed?
Well, this is not Congress. This is strictly state of Washington.
I understand.
Okay.
The Congress of Washington,
Well,
though.
okay. The legislature of Washington, no, this is sex education. But I do know that what you're thinking about is there's a whole bunch of charter amendments in here that are proposed by King County. And those most people don't know are in the ballot. And they are what's called advisory votes. And there are some advisory votes that come from the state Senate. The next one, right under R90 here, is advisory vote number 32. And that's about imposing, without a vote of the people, a retail sales tax on retail establishments for who give carry-out bags. Now, as you know, in the city of Seattle, they made carry-out bags kind of illegal.
Plastic ones. So, right. So now they're going to allow plastic ones.
Well, wherever they're allowed in the state of Washington, if this thing passes, if this thing is approved, they can charge the place for doing it. It doesn't necessarily say it's illegal to do it, but the state would charge.
So it's like the
tax.
same thing that they've done with grocery stores, where now they'll just have paper bags and they'll charge you for them if you choose to use them. Okay.
But you kind of have to ask at least I have to kind of ask myself, why should the state of Washington be charging the store I decided to shop in for giving me a bag? I don't like that. So I, I would repeal this.
Okay.
But on the other hand, if you like it,
Right.
feel free.
If you want to pay more for your carry out.
Well, and the real sad thing about that is, where does that money go? Are they doing something just wonderfully special?
Does
with
it say?
It just goes into the general fund and fills up some of their budget
Salaries.
holes where they could, which, by the way, governor and everybody's going to get a salary increase in January. So sure, they need the money, they say. I say not on my grocery bag.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Seems kind of slimy.
there's another advisory vote, number 33, and that's a tax on heavy equipment rentals. And from my point of view, we already tax heavy equipment rental enough. I don't want them to raise.
Is there a
the tax.
separate, is there a rental tax as opposed to like a sales tax?
Yes, rental property dealers are paying this tax through their B&O.
Oh, okay.
So consequently, it just raises their B&O. As you know, the B&O tax isn't necessarily whether you made any profit on anything.
Right, it's just your gross
It's
sales.
just for doing this activity in this state, you have to pay.
Yeah.
This would apply to a piece of rental equipment that you gave the local school so they could clear the brush on their property. But
Right.
no, it's and it, like most B&O taxes, it's already a little bit of a taking.
And they don't specify what the money is for.
No, this is going in the general fund. You know, the legislature loves to put little taxes on lots of different things that what just it doesn't bother me. They put it on, rental equipment, you say, until, of course, you got to go get a piece of rental equipment, and I'll guarantee you're paying it, not the dealer.
Right.
But on the other hand, they love all these little taxes. Our state is particularly onerous on this. But then, let's face it, there aren't very many states in the union that have, taxes, which are on businesses, business activity in the state, whether or not it's profitable. And that's a hard thing. But they do like them, this is my opinion again, because, there's a lobbyist for certain things. You'll notice the trial lawyers don't get very many taxes put on them. They got one of the best lobbies in Olympia. I bet you the rental equipment people just don't have a good enough lobbyist to go down there and talk them out of this. Not the nicest part of doing government.
And just to play devil's advocate, you don't think it just has to do with the fact that for the trial lawyers, how could you tax them for?
They charge their clients money. Sure, you could tax them.
So right now they're not taxed for their
They don't
services.
pay no tax either.
For their services, really
Neither do banks.
interesting.
Banks have a really big lobby.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, there's certain things that the B&O tax in the state of Washington is, we used to call it the construction and warehousing tax. We used to call it warehousing taxes for having equipment and stuff here, but it's on a lot more than that now. It was aimed at things that weren't retail. Because they always figured they could get to the retail by charging you
Sales tax.
sales tax.
Yeah.
But we do pay user tax, as you know, which is just like sales tax. If I was to go buy a piece of equipment wholesale, which normally wouldn't have a tax on it because it was being sold to a dealer, and the dealer would collect the sales tax when they sold it to you. But if I can go in someplace and buy from a wholesale company, I pay what's called user tax. So it's just exact same thing as sales tax.
Same rate and everything.
Yes, same rate and everything. But that's because I'm going to use the thing myself. If I buy that and sell it to someone else, then I don't pay the user tax.
If you have a
I
reseller's
collect
permit.
the retail sales.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's amongst businesses. That's the way it is. So no matter what, in the state of Washington, because we have such a high sales tax, it's supposed to be the last transaction pays. If we put it on every transaction up to that point, it'd be called a VAT tax, value added. And they have that a lot in Europe. That really raises the cost to the end consumer a whole lot more than a sales tax does. So I hope we don't get to VAT taxes anytime soon. But you may have another opinion. The next one is another occupation that's, business and occupation tax rate for, this one doesn't even tell you what certain businesses it's on. Let's skip that one. I'll go look in the book and see if I can find it. But on 35, it's specifically on Boeing and the aerospace. Isn't that sweet?
And they just decided to pack
as they're
up.
leaving, we kick them in the pants, right? Needless
Did
to say,
did
I
they-
wouldn't do that either.
Did they leave partially because of that being on the ballot?
I'm sure, well, because this was done by the legislature, so undoubtedly, Boeing knew about it and thought, well, that's just about the bottom of the barrel. And here we go, But I don't know that.
How much do you think the state collects on sales tax for airplanes that are made here?
They don't, because it's always wholesale, because it's going to go on. However, where they really collect is on all of the people who, well, first of all the people
Are
who
employed.
work here and buy all their stuff here and all the rest of it. But
yeah, we don't have an income tax. So.
yeah, we don't. But the real thing is you have all these outfits that are making parts for Boeing, and when you all of those are paying all the way along. But I will say, Boeing over the years, because they were a super big employer, our biggest in some of the years. For a lot of years, when I was growing up, they were the biggest. Got bennies. And truthfully, they did most of their warehousing outside of the state simply because of these B&O taxes. It's not in this book. I am, just out of just sheer orneriness, I would say repeal it. Because they're not even telling you. It's just certain businesses.
Certain businesses?
Yeah. And of course, it's $843 million.
Here, just read it.
This is not chump change. Yeah, I'm going to have to, but I would say, if you don't know what it is, repeal it.
Right.
Because this is not the best.
Well, you don't know who it's being collected
This
on,
one
and you
is
don't know
heavy
what it's
equipment.
going to go for.
This one is commercial airplanes. I'd almost bet you this one is something similar.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're 33, 34, and 35. But truthfully, the small little amount that they put on this ballot doesn't tell you which specific businesses it's on. It just says business and occupation tax rate for certain businesses without a vote of the people.
It's wild to me that they can do that.
Well, they can do it because they are the ones who oversee. Who oversees this ballot
Mm-hmm.
is Bob Ferguson, the state attorney general. So if this is deceptive, it's his fault.
Mm.
But let's face it, he won't care.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm gonna find that out. But I'll bet you anything, it's something. I think all three of these were directed at Boeing, because even the heavy equipment one would affect them.
And when did they make their announcement that they were going to South Carolina? Is it right?
About a month ago. Might have been a month and a half ago.
Okay.
And then they want this one has gotten a little publicity, thank God. They want to do a constitutional amendment to allow them to invest public funds in private stocks and in private ventures and things, which has never been allowed by our Constitution.
Seems like a conflict of interest.
It seems kind of like they could also lose some money and
real quick.
It depends on, and the worst part about it is you're doing this by committee, the legislature. Do you really think they make great decisions about who? And we don't find anything about it until the auditor actually chooses to audit. And our current auditor hasn't been auditing much. So my suspicion is they would invest in things that might have some benefit to somebody and hopefully keep our money safe. But I think the original construction of the Constitution was kind of smart. The West Coast, not California so much, but Oregon and Washington, when they wrote their constitutions, they didn't have quite as much faith in government as we do today. And they wanted it a little more controlled. So there's quite a few things in the Washington State Constitution that really, really nag at the legislators. But I think some of them are very good, including a very definite stance on private property. It's good to read the Washington State Constitution. It's not very long, but it starts right out with the people have the rights. And one of them, of course, is a private property, but it's just that your rights are not supposed to be abridged. And it's a limited government. One of the limits is that investing is not what they're supposed to be doing. And we hear complaints about that all the time, because here somebody does something out at the University of Washington and we should be able to take that and run with it and build a company around it and get money for the university from it. We can't do that here. We can do all the pure research you want to talk about, but when it comes down to making it a for-profit or even a non-for-profit company where there's risk, they're not able to use this is your tax money and mine cannot be used to fund the building of that company. And this is kind of in the same vein, but this is more structured on public funds that the state already holds, but it's tax money.
Is there anything earmarked for the?
They're talking about the public money that the state holds for long-term care services. In other words, this money has already been assigned a purpose.
I see. But it's just how they get the money.
Well, no.
Or how they invest
the money. They invest it in the meantime until they need to spend it on that.
Okay.
What happens if they lose that? What if their investment's not good? Then we get to fill that fund again.
Mm-hmm.
So it is kind of, how do you want them to handle the money that they take?
But they are able to invest the money somehow as of right now.
There's lots of, they can invest in state muni bonds. That's when you're building a dam or whatnot, and that money always gets repaid. The one that comes to mind first is the State Housing Authority folks. They invest money in housing projects, and then they get paid back with interest, just like any normal investment. The WEDFA, the Washington State Industrial Revenue Bonds, they can be loaned out, and then they get paid back with interest over a period of time, and they're very dependable. If you ever want to invest in like muni bonds, you find that their rating is very high. They get, all of these kinds of bonds, industrial revenue bonds, housing fund bonds. They always get repaid. So, okay. Well, I see on this side of the page is the next really biggie. Now these are the people, and this is president. I expect you know who you want to vote for president, right?
You know,
want to see the whole list?
I looked at it.
That's an interesting
I
list.
noticed we had two socialist parties on here.
Yeah. I mean, and if you watch the news, you wouldn't know that there was anyone running besides the first two. In fact, are they the first two? Yes, the first two. After that comes the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, the Socialism and Liberation Party, and the Socialist Workers Party. So you have choices.
Pretty interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
I think I'm actually, in fact, I know for sure I'm going to write in my candidate. The only question is who that candidate is. Because for a long time now, I've been thinking I'm going to write in Tulsi Gabbard because I think she's the most qualified candidate out there that I've seen. She's got a great career in the military. She has an interesting non-interventionist policy, foreign affairs policy that I'm interested in. And at this point, I think we're in a mess in a lot of areas in this country.
The Middle East is getting a little better. I'm amazed at what's been happening in the Middle East this year.
Is it really?
All these agreements that they're doing. Well, they're afraid of Iran, and they've suddenly come over to the idea that maybe Israel isn't the bad guy of the Western world, and they're making
deals with Israel.
Let's do business together. Let's do things together, and it'll stabilize. I can't wait to talk to your father about it, but it'll stabilize some things that have been very unstable over there.
What will?
The agreements, because all of a sudden, the basic hardline problem has been the wanting to annihilate Israel, and that's what's bonded the Arab groups together. But now they're a little more concerned about Iran than they are Israel, and they've come to the
because of their nuclear
that
program.
And because they're willing to use it. I mean, they're not just developing a nuclear. They flat out believe that blowing up the world would probably be wonderful. The ones who are in charge in Iran are pretty out there.
Really out there, yeah.
There's a lot of great Iranian people who would like to step back from the brink, but they're not in charge.
Yeah, I wonder. You wonder how.
We have a nice group of Iranian people here and down the West Coast, because they're mostly folks who were over here going to university when everything blew up over there and they couldn't go home. And they stay in connection with, and some of them are, they're great business people here. The Iranians are very well educated and in general quite entrepreneurial. But, work for Microsoft and other places too. And no, I think they'd love to be able to go home. But it's not in the condition it's in right now.
Yeah, a few places like that right now over there.
Yeah. Well, Sudan, though, is one of the ones that just made the deal. And it's going to settle a lot of problems for Sudan, because they're going to settle a few outstanding debts and have a trading partner, where they've been kind of out there on, pirates.
Don't they have to deal with Somalia? Yeah, I mean, that's their main issue, right?
Well, and I think that may be coming.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely, there's about 10 or 12 states over there, countries.
That have made deals with Israel?
That are on their way to making these deals, and we know nothing about it because it hasn't been in the press.
Mm-hmm.
It's negotiations, but it's really good news. There is some good news in the world.
That's good. Well, things to look forward to. We can hope.
So you know how to write in?
I'm guessing.
It's best to print.
Okay.
And it's really important to, I think it's on the other sheet there. It's really important to, someplace there it should say, spell it
Correctly,
right.
yeah.
So if you're going to do a write-in, be sure you can find the spelling and use your dark pen and print it, and then be sure to mark the X. Just printing it there doesn't get it done. You have to mark the X. Okay, now we've got a lot more people.
On to the people.
Oh, you know why this ballot is different than mine?
I'm in Kitsap.
You're in Kitsap County.
Yeah.
And we have, and here in King County, and that's why I'm not here. We have the little bubbles. To fill in. You've got, let's see, what does it say? They want you to fill in that whole square. So be sure you do. That helps. Okay, so now we've got the governor's races. I'm quite sure you know who there you want to go for.
I do, yeah.
And we have the lieutenant governor's races. Now there's an interesting thing for write-in on the lieutenant governor. Joshua Freed was
from Bothell.
Was one, the former mayor of Bothell was one of the candidates for governor who didn't make it. Mm-hmm. He decided to go out and ask people to write him in on lieutenant governor.
Okay.
And you'll notice the reason he does that is because there's 2 Democrats.
Right.
There's no Republican.
Right.
And these 2 are about as similar as you want to name, so you're really not getting much choice there. Mm-hmm. Now, that means he's not written up in the voters pamphlet, but of course he's online and you can look him up. So if you don't like either of those flavors, Joshua Freed has launched a write-in campaign. And in my lifetime, I've only seen one of those successful, and it was Linda Smith for the legislature years ago down in the Vancouver kind of area.
Wow.
Then we've got Secretary of State. And this is, Kim Wyman is the incumbent. She is the one that's been on the air so much talking about how safe our balloting is here in the state of Washington. She has a lot to brag about on that, because as we're hearing all the problems with mail-in ballots in other parts of the country, we've been 20 years with a very strong mail-in ballot process here. And just recently, of course, we went to all mail-in ballot. And we seem to be able to handle it.
What's the auditing process for that? Like, how do they know if it's effective or good?
It's county by county. So different counties can be a little bit different. But they have a statewide system that she put into effect that guarantees you don't vote in 2 counties. So they're checking that. That's done with the state stuff. But she comes into a county to help in a county if they ask for it, or if there's a lot of complaints about it. But she works with all the county records and people, that's what they call it, elections and records. And she's pretty proud of what's in place here. I think around the country, our system is considered one of the better. But this one will test it, because, not only are we all voting by mail-in, which of course I don't mail in my ballot. I go put it in the slot at the ballot box that's out in front of the Ballard Library, because I just think that's a little closer to me delivering my own ballot. But it's like the old absentee ballot system, but you do need to be registered ahead, so they have a signature to check it against. And it's really important when you sign your ballot. They added this feature a few years ago where you put your phone number or an email. If they have any question about whether that was you or not, your signature looks different, they're required to call you or email you. Doesn't help if you don't see it until 2 weeks later, but it helps right in the instance. So she's got a little more checks and balances here in the state of Washington than some of the others. From my point of view, she's been doing a good job, and I would say if we ever have someone working that's doing a good job, it's good to hang on to them. The state treasurer, again, the incumbent is Dwayne Davidson. He's been extremely good in this. As you probably know, we had somebody in here that wasn't good before, and so Dwayne Davidson had a lot to clean up. Now, obviously, the Democrat Party decides to run someone against him, but I will say Secretary of State and Treasurer, and not auditor, but these two quite often go to Republicans, and I think the reason is since we've been having a Democrat executive department in the state for so many years, that people like these positions, which are important, state treasurer, secretary of state, to be a different party, so that you have some checks and balance. But of course, they, would claim that they're going to be professional about it anyway. I would say that would be good with the auditor too. Although we had a Democrat auditor for years who was excellent, we don't seem to be auditing much right now. And where I really object is we haven't been auditing the city of Seattle at all. And that just leaves the city of Seattle, all the auditor audits outside of Olympia is how tax money is taken and used, whether it's taken and used for what the law says it has to be used for. And we haven't had an audit since this lady has been in the audit department.
How long has that been?
4 years. She's just running to be reelected. We had a guy that before her that luckily didn't last more than 1 year. He went to jail. So she was appointed, and now she's running. I not go for her simply because she hasn't been doing a good job. That's my point of view. But that's the kind of thing that you have to kind of know something about how these jobs are done before you can be, you have to educate yourself a little bit on that. Next comes Attorney General. I don't like the way Bob Ferguson does the job. I know Bob real well. He was our King County representative up in the Wallingford, north of Seattle area. I just don't think he makes a very good Attorney General, and he's had a lot of payoffs to do. Being Attorney General is running a great big law department, and it's got to be done well. I would say Rob McKenna did a heck of a good job. we came off of that and got Bob Ferguson, and I don't think he does as good a job, so I'd move on. I kind of say the same thing about Lands Commissioner. The Lands Commissioner of the state of Washington manages all the state lands that, and particularly state lands that are leased out for other purposes. This is grazing land, this is forest land, this is the leases on Lake Union, which is the ones I'm most aware of. And they're supposed to be leased out to bring money in for the schools. We have not been getting much money in for the schools from Hillary Franz. I think she's been spending it on probably the department things, but it doesn't seem to be doing the job for our public schools.
So kind of like property taxes go towards school funding, this public lands.
Yeah. Well, the writers of the Constitution were smart enough to realize that timberlands, grazing lands, and even, I mean, they literally took, they moved the boundaries on Lake Union further out into the water so that they would have leased lands that they could lease out. The initial sale of tidelands on Lake Union would have meant that the state didn't have any land to lease there. They sold those tidelands so that they could build the University of Washington. That was its build. The first that it built out at Montlake was from selling of state leased land as a state tidelands on Lake Union. But then they came out further and said, but we can lease you more. But those leases cannot be bought. And that money, along with the forestry money and the grazing, go into a fund in the state that's supposed to bring down the cost of school buildings. Because let's face it, around the state, different school districts are more or less able to raise big bond issues for building schools. And the intent was that it would keep that cost down. But we haven't, I mean, this is one of the things that I'm not, I do know that Hillary Franz also has to take another look at how we're managing our forests, because we really have to do some cleanup in our forests.
Something has to happen.
Well, we have to do cleanup, and we should keep roads in so that we can fight fires. But, you know, we have the environmental issues of people who don't necessarily want to have people in the forests. On the other hand, just not having people there isn't what keeps the fires from happening. As you know, you live out there where there's, you know how much cleanup you have to do.
Oh, well, and my friend Brian, Brian Verway, who went to St. John's, he's fisheries and wildlife. I think he's a master's in that now. But we were out hiking down in Mount St. Helens a few months back in the summertime, and he was pointing out how there's, you know, just a lot of factors that go into the mismanagement of wildlife. And one of those factors is the differing interest groups that, you know, that try to get their say so in something along the line. So, you know,
and it's public. So you have quite a public process.
Right.
But we do know that a forest fire is not a good management tool.
No.
And so there are things we need to do, and it's better for the wildlife, it's better for the streams, for the fish, everything, if we don't have those big fires.
Yeah. And
that takes managing the forest land. And we have experts around who can advise. But like you say, there's always a lot of differing opinions.
Yeah, compete. Well, what's frustrating though is that it's just competing interests.
Yeah,
It's a political thing. So
it
it's like,
becomes political,
you,
yes.
the conservationists get their say so in this aspect of things, but that combined with the management on this other side lead to these raging fires. And it's like, well, I think we all have a vested interest
In better land management.
yes, much better. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the gal that's running against Hillary Franz is from timber country, timber down around Aberdeen, Hoquiam, and whatnot, and I would say probably very much in touch with that subject. She seems to speak quite well on the what we need to do to
Have
help our forestry out and not have the fires, and help the people who have to do
Yeah.
the work. I mean, that's the biggest thing is we need the folks to do the work and not get in their way.
Yeah, well, and it's a cool thing. I mean, it's a resource that if managed properly can be pretty sustainable.
Well, and any benefit that comes out of it, besides the wood products being available for folks and the replanting, which usually is all done by the people who do the leases, it means there is revenue for building new schools, and that's a nice thing too. The next one is Superintendent of Public Instruction, and bear in mind this is that kind of tied back to that referendum 90. The referendum 90, who wanted to pass it was Chris Reichdahl. This is kind of a vote on that all over again. The Mia Espinoza that's running against him did not want it, and she's a school teacher. She's she's in the education field.
Okay.
But anyway, I think she's a mother too.
Okay.
Okay, and then the next one is insurance commissioner.
What the heck is that?
Well, we have an insurance commissioner in our state because this is the person that has to decide whether insurance is being like on health insurance. You know how we have different companies that offer health insurance. But this person says, oh, we got 47 mandates that you have to be sure you cover. Now, the mandates are written by the legislature, not by this guy. But he looks at the competing companies and makes sure that anyone that's doing it in the state of Washington hits the things that the legislature has said we have to do, as well as a place you can complain to if you think that you have been
Wronged by an insurance company.
Right. More like you had an insurance claim and they just blew it off and that kind of thing. Not so much by the rates, because that's a factor of you just don't use that insurance company if your rates are too high. But just fair dealing, that they're covering the things that the state says they have to, and that one comes mostly in health insurance. But this is on, how many, and how many different places you can get your car insurance. But they have to live up to, they have to have a certain standard. They get lots and lots and lots of complaints to the insurance commissioner on a particular company. They can lose their license to do that work in the state. That's basically who it is.
I see.
Now you want my opinion?
Yeah.
The guy that's been doing it for way too many years is probably after the first of the year, if he gets reelected, he'll just decide he's going to retire. That way it allows the governor to appoint somebody. And since we all know that we all expect one specific party to be in office, that they'll pick their, so that I honestly believe that's the only reason Mike Kreidler is contesting this time, because he's ready to retire. So I would let the other person running against him, since we already had a, what do we call that, primary?
Mm-hmm.
And in the primary, there were several people, and these are the two that come out. Well, that's the way I'd go, because I think he's not going to be there anyway.
Just to jump back a little bit, you implied that Jay Inslee's going to win. We both know that he is, right?
What everyone instead. I'm not going to vote for him.
Right. I'm not either, personally. But is this not a very special year in that if the Republican Party had put together a candidate that is, I guess that would be exciting, wouldn't this have been an opportunity for them to get in that office?
And they'd have to be excited about it. And I think they're very fractured. And
in Washington State specifically.
Washington State. I mean, we've had a couple.
Because what was it? Fortunato, Freed, and Culp were the three.
Tim Eyman.
Oh, and Eyman, right?
Actually, Eyman Eyman came in third. Freed came in fourth. Fortunato, I think, came in sixth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
But some of the Republicans whose names you would recognize decided none of those were good candidates, so they went over to Yakima and got a lovely Cuban doctor to run, who nobody knew. And that's where basically the Republican money went. And needless to say, it's amazing that Mr. Culp got through the race. I think it does speak to how the rest of the state really, really does want to change. But they want a sheriff. They're, let's face it, I guess Seattle and maybe some little edges of Tacoma or something are the only places that like to burn down buildings and have people out rioting in the streets. The rest of the state doesn't. So that's, I believe, why he came through the mix. Not because he's from Republic, smallest little space you can find over on the east side of the state, but by the way, a very self-reliant part of the state, and not because he spent a lot of money on it, but because he's the sheriff, and he stepped up and said, "You're not doing the right thing." And the governor, Inslee, has been very hands-off about the places in the state that have been blowing up. And a lot of people are very, very unhappy with it. So I think that's why he came through. Not because he certainly had a lot of opposition, whereas Inslee had no opposition. Inslee outspent him by a whole bunch, but didn't have to, because that's the Democrat Party. In this state, that's the strength. So I'd love to see Lauren Culp elected. For one thing, a change at the governor's house would clean out some departments of the state of Washington that are not working well. But they haven't been for a long time because they're in one party control. And I don't care which party it is. One party control for a long period of time where you don't change the executive usually ends up with people who just kind of own their office. And I would say that applies to the DSHS. I would say it applies to WashDOT. I would say it certainly applies to the mental health problems that have gotten our one big mental health place, Stillicum, it isn't even accredited now. Those three branches of the state of Washington use a lot of money, and they need to be, they need a refreshing of who manages them. And you won't get that with this electing the same party.
When was the last Republican who
About 40
was
years
executive?
ago.
40 years.
But I'll tell you, there have been some Democrats along the way who've done a better job. Governor Gary Locke, when the people voted that they wanted $30 tabs, and the state Supreme Court decided that no, it was too complicated a ballot. You know, you didn't know what you wanted. He went to the legislature and said, we better put this in play because the people want it. And we didn't do right by them, because he also had the same situation we just had, which is...
This was crazy, wasn't it? They ruled it unconstitutional because
you didn't understand what you were voting for.
I thought there was something else. What did they say?
No, in fact, it wasn't unconstitutional. What they said was they were 9-0, which tells you a lot about your current members of the state Supreme Court. 9-0. You didn't understand that ballot. And you particularly didn't understand that ballot title. Well, the initiative didn't set the title. Bob Ferguson did. If you want to take somebody out, take Bob Ferguson out. He put the wrong title on. Do you think Bob Ferguson wanted that to pass? So he put a lousy title on it. That shouldn't have even been considered at this point, because that was your attorney general. He's supposed to be defending this in front of the state Supreme Court. Do you think he defended it very well?
Probably not. But wasn't it? I heard that it was because there were you can't have, what was this? Was it a referendum, or what was the?
It was an initiative.
Initiative. You can't have an initiative that tackles two issues at once or something. And that's okay. And that's what you're saying. And
but what's worse about that? You know, the gun control initiative that passed last time.
Yeah.
It had 8 things in it. Do you think it was found on... it didn't even go to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
No, it's... let's face it, they were looking for something. But
right.
A governor worth his mettle would go back to the legislature. But let's face it, the legislature itself has 2 or 3 times considered...
Hello?
I hope the game's on.
It's okay. It's okay.
Have considered fixing this problem about how the state has allowed Sound Transit to tax people on a not your typical blue book thing. It's a way of making the what your car is supposedly worth higher, and that's what they're taxing you on. That needed to change, and it would have changed with this initiative, because this initiative would have brought it down to $30 and tough luck. You know, no matter what your car is worth, it's going to be $30, because it's just about an excise tax giving you a little tab that says it's okay to, as a state of Washington, own a car or a truck or anything else. This should not be based on your buying your car over and over and over again. And the citizens of the state of Washington voted this thing down every time. I mean, they voted to reduce it time and time again. And the trouble with initiatives, as well thought out as they would be, and it's tough to get a statewide initiative, get all the signatures and get it passed, and then you got to get it voted for. But 2 years into it, the legislature can change it, and that's what's happened
each time.
But what Gary Locke said, they want it, they deserve to get it, at least that, and they did. They took them down, and the state did not fall apart. But they got rid of the state using this phony way of figuring out what cars were worth, and went back to the Blue Book. Well, Sound Transit, without saying anything to the voters when they passed the Sound Transit thing, went and started using that same phony, baloney, inflated value system. And their stance is, well, we can use anyone we want. Now, you, as a voter, did not choose that. Talk about a ballot item that wasn't understood by the voters. My stance is that was Sound Transit's this last time. Because it really did confuse people. But we knew what $30 tabs were. But because you've got a heavy majority Democrat in the state legislature, and if we still have a Democrat governor, don't expect that this legislature is going to fix it, even though they could.
Yeah, it's very disappointing when you listed those three things that the executive could do differently if it was a different party.
Well, that's just starting.
That's just the start. But the mental health issue is a huge issue affecting the whole West Coast.
Yeah.
And I mean the whole country, but especially it seems like it's bad along the West Coast. And I just see when I go to the MPAC meetings, we haven't been having them for a long time now, but when I was going, there's a lot of frustration in Seattle about mental health and homelessness.
Oh, yeah. And if it's going to be fixed, it's got to be a state thing to fix it.
Or a Seattle thing, right?
Well,
if Seattle took it on,
no.
don't you think? Because it's only, like you said, it's predominantly an issue in Tacoma, Seattle, in the metropolitan area.
State constitution. Mental health is a state responsibility. General health is a county responsibility. The city's responsibility is police, fire, and what we call public safety. The county becomes responsible for that also, but only in unincorporated. Each of the cities, whether you're talking about Bellevue or Kirkland or whatnot, have to do their own police, and that means the municipal courts and things. But when it comes down to funding mental health care, it goes back to the state. Why? Because it needs to be a system that works in all the counties, or the problem moves. Now, can the city come up with some solutions that they would choose? Yes, but when it comes to real mental health hospitalization, and one of our biggest problems with mental health is that you can't coerce somebody into going in for treatment. Well, the drug trade really, really, really changed that whole dynamic because, as I was growing up, I'm sure there were drugs around. On the other hand, the typical mental health person, the person who needed mental health, had lots of choices. We had nervous breakdown wards. We had places, and they would, yes, commit themselves, or their family members could. That got changed. So now, if that person is totally out of their mind, but resisting, the best you can do is 72 hours at Harborview, and then you got to let them go, and they're a danger to themselves and others. We really need to address that. We did a small little piece towards doing it last balloting. But we really do, and that's a state, that would have to be a state law. Second to that, though, the state is going to put some new mental health facilities in Seattle at the old Northwest Hospital campus, which is now part of UW Med. And the reason they're going to do it, it took a lot of people pushing this for the last number of years. And I think it is one small piece of solving this, is to come up with beds. It's going to be a 4-story building. Beds for mental health so that we have enough to deal with it. But it's also going to be offices to do what we call telemed across the whole state for mental wellness checks and therapy checks. You will go in Colville, you'll go into your little doctor's office, your general practitioner, and he'll set you up on this screen that gets you talking to a psychiatrist in Seattle, and then he'll get the word from the psychiatric doctor what he needs to prescribe for you, and he will watch over your meds. As we know, most mental health conditions can be somewhat controlled with medicine if the person so chooses the therapy and gets moving with it. But you can overwhelm that medicine by drugs and alcohol. So it truly means somebody has to be committed to it if they're on the outside. The therapy that I think we are all hoping for, the treatment we're all hoping for, is literally it's like the old alcohol treatment. You had your treatment by going to your AA meetings and changing the way you do things. But then you also had residence places where you could book in for usually a month, and get clean and sober and sometimes some meds to clean you up. Well, I think we all think that we need some of those longer term treatment places, but at least let's get the hospital going, because that takes the real hard right now crisis people. But anyway, the state is doing that. It's going to take about 4 years to build the building. It's going to be at Northwest Hospital. Jeez. And it's going to help. But what we really need is the legislation that says, if somebody is a threat out there, we need the facility to do it. We have McNeil Island out there that's got like eight guys out there.
I thought it was all shut down.
No, there's still, I think, a few sex offenders or whatnot. But that could be rehabilitated and be a full-time mental health only treatment.
Wasn't that the one that they showed in Seattle as dying?
No, they showed one back in New Hampshire.
Oh, okay.
But that's exactly the kind of a treatment center we need, is what they showed in that clip from New Hampshire. Similarly, I suppose we could do something out in the middle of the state where it's far enough away from. See, the reason you have to be away from other people is drugs seep in through systems of people. And the person who is mentally impaired because they have had such a long history with, well, I guess with meth it doesn't take that long, needs treatment, but then also needs to be away from people that can undo that treatment rather quickly.
Right.
And since there's so much money tied up in the drug trade, let's not expect that the folks that have been selling them drugs are just going to go away.
Yeah, I mean it's a huge problem.
It's a huge problem, but it is a state issue.
A state issue, I understood. Wouldn't it make a lot of sense to just have a system where, if you committed a crime, and you were deemed to have been, or are mentally unstable for whatever reasons, drug or otherwise, then you would be diverted to, this hospital-like setting. You would be committed involuntarily, just like you would be in jail. But instead of going to jail or prison, you go to this other place for a sentence.
Well, and you hear people talk all the time about drug court. And we have a drug court in Seattle. it's virtually empty. You want to know why?
Why?
Because drug court requires that the person who comes before drug court is admitting that their drug activity caused them to do these crimes or helped, and they need treatment to get over it. The only way you get somebody into drug court is to say, otherwise you go to jail.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean,
but we quit that part. Our Pete Holmes, our city attorney, started saying nobody can possibly do a drug crime because they just need their drug treatment. And then we had Dan Satterberg start down the same road. So now we have a system of prosecuting attorneys who are not willing to take these cases and say, I'm quite sure from time to time a police officer says, you could go to drug court, but you got to have the stick along with the carrot. Mm-hmm. And they try to just do the carrots. And you saw that in Seattle Is Dying. The guy gets booked in and he's back out on the street. And he's got, 45 different cases that could be, but nothing's going to happen because he's crazy as a hoot owl. And so if you take him into court, he even carries a piece of paper around with him that says he can't commit a crime because he's too crazy. But it's drugs. And so we were making some progress in the drug courts when it was first set up because the Seattle Police Department had the tools. Mm-hmm. And the former city attorney recognized, and he was pretty progressive, but Pete Holmes came in with the idea that drugs should all be legalized. And one of the first steps towards doing that is we're not going to call it a crime.
But that's the problem, is that model for decriminalizing or legalizing is not a good model. I agree that drugs, it shouldn't be illegal to use or to sell drugs, but it should be your own.
But you're responsible.
But you're always responsible. Yeah. So if you commit a crime, whether you're on drugs or you're not on drugs, you should be, held accountable. Yeah. Now, part of the reason why I think we're in a big mess as a country is because our rehabilitation methods are terrible. They're not rehabilitation methods, and so what we'd really need to do is set up a system where you're able to get the treatment that you need, but that you can't be allowed to continue to commit crimes in the meantime. Yeah. So it just seems like big opportunities are missed, in this election cycle with the state.
I mean, that particular one, it's hard. You're hard pressed to even see that they're interested in trying to, because that's truly a legal solution. We need to change some laws, and then you can apply the carrot and the stick and get back to what used to work for criminal drug user. Mm-hmm. And whether that drug is alcohol or something else, if it's used as an excuse in a crime, it shouldn't be an excuse.
Right. And this is where I think that the two parties could come together in a bipartisan way and really figure out something that would work for both ends and come to a really cool solution where maybe we go a little bit more left when it comes to the laws and the legality of drugs, but then maybe we move a little bit more right when it comes to the enforcement of laws.
The truth is, in this state, you don't need two parties. You got one party in charge. Yeah. They could pass it tomorrow.
Right. They could do whatever they wanted, which is another interesting thing, to think about.
Maybe they're not as motivated to do it because they're one party hey, we can just keep talking about solving the problem instead of actually doing anything to solve the problem.
And there's a little bit of, there's a federal level to these drug laws and all of that. And so it gets complicated. But as we've seen, there's a way to get around that with marijuana.
Well,
so
they're getting around it because truthfully, this is not the federal law that is making this possible. It is local prosecutors and local decision making. That many of the things that people hate about these encampments in Seattle are things that folks are doing illegally, but the city of Seattle does not want to call them responsible.
Right.
And I think most people who work with people in both the mental health field and in the drug rehabilitation, and definitely in alcohol rehabilitation, say the first and foremost thing you have to do is establish that they feel responsible for themselves so that they can make some progress. And there are mental problems that go beyond that, and therefore you got to get them back to a position of being able to be responsible, and then they can follow on in activity. My very, very best friend was manic depressive, and I saw 3 complete episodes during her life where she was totally, totally out of control. But when she'd get back, which each one of those took a trip to Stillicum, but when she'd get back, then she could handle her management of a rather severe manic depressive, which you live with. You don't get over it. You live with various drugs, because she could get a handle on it. But once in a while, like I say, 3 times that I knew of, she couldn't, and then it needed hospitalization. But the drug, the illegal drugs that they're buying out on the street are any kind of level of substance.
Who knows what you're getting?
Who knows what you're getting?
Yeah.
And the fentanyl pretty much puts them down.
It's a scary one, fentanyl.
George Floyd died from a fentanyl overdose.
Yeah, that's something that I heard not too long ago. That he was complaining of chest
well, he was complaining he
pains
couldn't breathe before anybody, got him down on the ground.
Yeah.
And that's why he wouldn't get in that. He didn't want to get in the car, and he didn't want to do this and that. He was having breathing problems. Well, when they did the autopsy, his system was flooded with fentanyl and something else too. So, it had been mixed in something, but he'd gotten some really bad drugs.
Right.
And he was a drug user who had a depressed immunity. That's the problem. You wear yourself out. Even though he was a big, hardy guy. But the sad part is he would have died without anybody really knowing how to help him, because he's out on the street and he's not asking for help.
Yeah, so many people. That's how it goes.
But then, of course, it became something totally different.
Right.
But when all is said and done, when it, that's what's gonna.
That's the causing of all these issues.
Was
Yeah.
fentanyl.
Yeah.
And it's sad. It's always sad.
Yeah.
So do you want to look at the rest of these people?
Sure, let's go through.
Now these are your Kitsap people, so I know a few of them and I don't know others. But you need to be, to be a really good voter, you should be aware of who in your area. See, here we go. State senators, state representatives. Personally, I'd all vote for the one that's not the party in charge, But I do know 2 of them. I do know April Ferguson, and she's a good person. I really don't know the others because they come from over your way. And then ditto with commissioners, although quite often I don't know about your commissioner. Now, obviously your commission still has the party system, King County tries to pretend that they don't, but anyway, and I know a couple of these guys, so I marked them, but you can do what you want. The one I want you to do is the Supreme Court Justice, position number 3. Dave Larson would make a big difference on that Supreme Court that just ruled 9-0, that said that you don't know what you're doing when you read a ballot title and ballot. And the gal he's running against was just appointed to this position, but she voted in the 9-0, which to me is enough reason not to vote for her. So feel free. But you'll notice the sad thing is there's 2 Supreme Court justices that just voted that 9-0 that don't even have any opposition. Isn't that sad? So you don't even get a choice. And this one, I happen to know Richard Stearns, and I do know he's a good judge. So that would be my choice to do this. See this unexpired term? He would only be in there for 2 years, and then we'll see. So there's no incumbent here right now. And I don't know your Kitsap judges. Let's see, that's not that
Doesn't
one.
look like we have too many
2 of
choices.
them, yeah, only in this one. And if you pull out your Kitsap voters pamphlet, there will be something written up about these 2 women who are contesting for judge position number 1. But I really don't know who they are. I have a little. I don't vote if I don't know anything about it. And the reason I say that to myself, I mean, I could just throw a dart or something, but the reason I say that is that somebody out there knows better than I do, and they're voting, and I don't want to cancel out their vote. Okay, now we went through all the measures.
Yep.
So we're done.
We're done?
So you don't get all those King County Charter amendments.
Do you want to talk about those for a second?
Well, I will just say I voted no on every gosh darn one of them. But I voted no on them because I think they are things that they should really bring to the people and discuss. One of them is $1.7 billion worth of taxes to remodel the Harborview Hospital. But they have not been out to us and talked about how to, what to, just this issue about how much of the new remodel would help with this mental health thing, which we know. Harborview is our King County health. Harborview is our King County hospital that any person in the county of King can walk in the door and get treatment, get help if they have no insurance, if they have nothing. Every county in the state has some way of dealing with that because it's a county responsibility. Well, in this case, that's where our county responsibility for mental health care, as well as trauma. I gotta say, Harborview is fabulous on trauma. They come down here from Alaska, they come over from Montana. We're the best trauma hospital in the region. But shouldn't they come to the voters before they ask for $1.7 billion over a 20-year time and explain what and how and, like you would with a school bond issue, which I'm not sure are the best run there are, but at least they come tell you about it.
Well, I want to talk about schools, actually.
Oh, good.
What's
the other thing I wanted to say
yes.
the King County Charter amendments, there's no way that we should have the politicized county commission deciding who should be our sheriff or changing what our sheriff can and can't do. The citizens of the county of King 24 years or more ago went to the ballot and on an initiative and got the right to vote for our sheriff, because it's the rural and the outside the cities parts of the county that the sheriff is really important to, and those people don't think they're very well represented on
anything.
yeah, and especially county council. Yes, I'd say there's that, you know, I think Reagan Dunn does a great job for out in the county, but he's one vote, and you know it's a council of 9, and so no, they would not be I would not vote to have them be appointing the sheriff.
Seems to make sense.
Okay, schools.
Schools. What is the Washington State history with charter schools?
The state itself opposed having charter schools in general, and it's in the makeup of the powers that be of the state of Washington didn't want charter schools. Charter schools, we went 3 times to the ballot with initiatives before we got one that passed.
In which years?
Well, this particular one is only like 5-6 years old, but it's all been in the last 20 years. The Spadies, who owned Dick's Drive-Ins, were very, very on this subject and helped get it going in the first place. The idea of charter schools is something other than your routine set of public schools. The way the charter amendment was done for the state of Washington, they are public schools. They receive some public money, but the state has been very chintzy on how much public money the charter schools get. So it's very hard for anybody to make a charter school work in the state of Washington.
When you say that charter schools are public schools, are they under fewer regulations for their curriculum, or how does that work?
Well, for one thing, you could have a charter school that just takes low-income children. So, in other words, they don't have to take just anybody that comes. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think the charter amendment is weighted towards that, because they didn't want them to be elitist schools. Well, believe me, they're not. They're all nonprofits. They still hire accredited school teachers. But they aren't as... Bear in mind, the schools in the state of Washington, other than the superintendent that we talked about there, are mostly run by local school districts. And the Seattle School District is adamantly opposed to charter schools. Now,
is that because of teachers' unions?
Yeah, and for whatever reason in this state, the teachers' union is just heavily opposed. I mean, they were the ones that fought the amendments. They spent lots of money fighting it.
I mean, cynically, don't we know why?
Well, we kind of know why, but isn't this kind of sad? Wouldn't you think unions that represent school teachers, knowing that school teachers are people who want all the children to get instructed, why would you oppose a charter school that might be a little more successful with this group of students because their parents are asking for it? In other words, nobody makes a child go to a charter school. Charter schools are set up mostly to give the parents of those children
a choice.
Yeah. And it's a good thing to have.
A choice, yeah.
A choice.
And where your kids get their education.
And from my point of view, you know, my father years ago thought we shouldn't even be running Washington State schools. We should just give people a voucher to go to any school they want to go to, and the school has to be accredited, like all the Catholic schools, the Christian schools and the charter schools are just as accredited as what we call the public schools. But choices, you could have workforce aiming high school charter schools that did training for various trades, because our Seattle public schools don't really do trade school anything. So we could have charter schools inside the city that helped kids, not when they graduated from high school, but all the way using their high school years.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it could start at middle school and high school years, to become, as you stepped out the door with your diploma, you go straight into the electricians or straight into welding and the kinds of things we need down in the shipyards.
Whatever it is, as long as it's opt-in,
And
as long as there's a choice.
Reading, writing, math, science, all those things you have to do to be accredited. But you can learn math in a trade program.
Yeah.
And truthfully, our Seattle schools are just negligent on that kind of training. I will say our Seattle colleges now, the Maritime Academy down there is wonderful. But you should be able to do Maritime Academy at the same time you do in high school. You shouldn't have
For
to
sure.
wait until Seattle College.
For some, even younger, if
Yeah.
they want to. Yeah.
So, I think the charter schools have a real good place in society. And in some states, they love them. Louisiana, after the big hurricane that came through, the last really big one, Katrina, all their schools were going to be closed for a year. They opened up the state to charter schools, and they had charter schools up and running in various places, and
To varying degrees of success, and that's the whole point of the charter schools.
But they put a real good gimmick in theirs, which there's a movie, documentary done. It's called something about Superman. And it's about the schools in Louisiana, especially New Orleans, following Katrina. Anyway, basically, they have this gimmick that says the 4 lousiest schools. They all do their school thing, and there's a lot of oversight, no question about that. In fact, they have a system where you can do observation of the teacher teaching, so that you can, you can give them coaching, and you can decide how they're doing in a job. And that's came through a couple of these charter school people who run charter schools decided that they could help their teachers be the best teachers they could be with this coaching thing, without missing a day on the job. But they put a thing in that the 4 lousiest schools that had the lousiest results at the end of the year got sold to any of the top 4. So the folks running the top 4 were also trying to be the top 4. And then they could, because charter schools, where they work, end up being networks. They're not just one school, because then it would only be in White Center.
Right.
And you don't want the kids in Shoreline to have to go to White Center to get to your charter school.
Right.
So they end up being kind of statewide networks. And doesn't mean you can't be just in one place. But so the ones who are rated the highest have an advantage. They'll get more schools next year.
Right.
The ones that are in the lowest are not getting the job done. So those kids, without changing where they go to school, need to get a better um, person, people running the charter school.
That's
That's worked for them amazing.
that's good. That's good to hear
You
because
know who complains about it the most?
who's that?
The Catholic schools.
Oh yeah.
They literally, the charter schools in Louisiana are giving them a run for their money.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it seems pretty successful.
Yeah,
Because
but they
theoretically,
get full state support.
Mhm.
They get the same amount per student as if they were going to this other school.
Right.
And that's where a voucher system would work. If you really committed to every student in the state of Washington should get the best education they can get, that, I don't know, here in the city, I think it's $17,000 a year can buy per student.
Wow.
You would get the check for $17,000.
That's
that
crazy.
Can only go to an accredited school for a year's worth of education for your child, and you would pick and choose.
I really like the voucher system, and that the Louisiana gimmick that you were talking about is interesting to me because on the one hand, I think I'm glad that it's successful, but on the one hand, I think the biggest factor in charter schools being successful is there being that choice in competition and allowing the failures to fail and die, and the successful
this
ones
guarantees that they die.
right, but through sales. But the one thing down the road that I would be concerned about for that is, you're back to having the state determine what is and isn't successful.
They're still public schools.
Right,
Whereas the voucher, I would love it if it could be for any accredited school.
Exactly.
And then you'd have some of the private, not state-run schools. Also,
Catholic schools.
Krista.
Yeah.
I mean, there are Northwest. I mean, let's face it, we wouldn't even have a school for the hard of hearing if it wasn't for the fact that a bunch of parents went out and started a school because it wasn't happening in the public schools.
Right.
And there probably would be more of that because
definitely
each student brings with them the ability to help this school be successful. That's why tuition is a highly advantageous motivator. But a lot of people don't have the money to pay tuition. The Seattle Archdiocesan Catholic Schools set up a whole fund, a whole fulcrum fund, just so that kids whose parents can't afford tuition can get help doing tuition. No, I mean, the tuition stops people from having choice. Whereas if you had a voucher, everybody would have choice.
Which is, I think, what you want.
And the answer is always, well, they'd have to have too much. They wouldn't have to have any more than they have now. In fact, I think you could probably take a little bit off of it and see if you can do it for $15,000 a student.
Well, and that's why the teachers' unions don't like it.
Yeah,
that's
the
why
tuition up here at St. John's, which is kitty corner from Greenwood, $7,900 a year.
That's what I'm saying. Like it's incredible.
Yeah, no.
You're paying less for Catholic school than you are for for public school, but you just don't understand it. You don't know it.
You've already paid for
right.
the public school.
Right.
Through your taxes, and so now you got to come up with that extra, which is why it puts some children and some parents out of the running for having choice. And it's always good to have choice.
Absolutely.
Our whole system is based on choice.
I mean, and that's part of the reason. I mean, democracy is great except for when it isn't. And the one place where it isn't is where you have these terrible choices. These, what I would call them, they're not exactly false choices as far as the rhetorical fallacy goes, but it's close.
The unopposed judge there, and she's just done something that you really didn't like, but really don't have any way to vote against her.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of sad.
It's very sad, and it's at the federal level as well, in my opinion.
It's yeah.
There's not as much difference from, the establishment left and the establishment right as there really should be.
Right.
It's an issue.
Well, and then you have another problem that has really, really come along in the last number of years, quite a few years, and that's the media bias. When the media tries to make your choice for you.
But don't you think that's been going on for a long time?
It's much
It's
worse.
just it's now we can
worse.
we can see it. It's so easy to see now. So it seems worse, and it may be worse to some degree, but I think that it's just always been going on.
Maybe they're being more honest about it.
They're not being more honest about it. It's just that you have, with the power of the internet and
That's true.
multiple sources.
The hope is that the power of the internet, the power of the podcast is going to make it so people have other opinions at least. Because that's how I take the media these days, as that's their opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And then once in a while you catch them in a bold-faced lie and you say, well, you don't have your right to your own facts.
It's really disconcerting, but in a way it's awesome, because just like we're talking about with schools, with the internet, with multiple sources of media, you have more choice in what you can listen to. You have more choice in what content can create your opinions for you. Yeah.
Well, and frankly, I think we're going to lose the newspapers. I think Frank Blethen knows we're going to lose the Seattle Times, because they're running to one opinion now too. That's fairly new in my lifetime. It used to be way more balanced.
Mm-hmm.
Now, artificial balance isn't balance. So you could say, well, by trying to find balance, you sometimes skew the news too, but it always seemed to be just
you see that
better when at least you try.
Right. Well, you see that even with cable news, right? It used to be Hannity and Combs, right? It used to be, one on the right, one on the left. I forget what the...
Well, Hannity was the one on the right, and Combs was the one on the left.
But then
but the interesting show that I grew up with had a priest, a rabbi, and I don't think he was Islamic, but a Protestant, a priest, a Protestant, and a rabbi on a talk show talking about current events. It was, eye-opening, especially since, as far as religion goes, we all tend to see our own little one. Well, it was a little bit eye-opening.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that was going on during the era of the civil rights movement and stuff, and the churches were very involved in all that, which it was good to get the opinions.
Yeah, those dissenting opinions are important.
I don't think you could do that today.
Well,
on one of our major channels, they just don't even recognize religion as something people want to talk about.
Well, not only that, although I think they're missing the boat on that, because Jordan Peterson has a great series on religion out there that has, I think, over 1 million views. Oh, so it's not a lack of appetite.
A little nun down in Alabama started a whole network, and I mean, they don't even talk about her as a woman who did something special.
Who's that?
Mother Angelica, EWTN.
Oh, she started that network?
International network for the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
It isn't coming out of the Vatican. It isn't coming out of Rome. No, she did it out of Alabama.
Yeah.
Not the most Catholic place you could ever find. But her point was, this is the new medium, and we should be, and she says, you can just start that in your garage. You
can. With a laptop, yeah.
And she did.
Yeah.
So she was ahead of all this, but isn't it wonderful?
Yeah.
No, and the truth is you're right. What breaks open the media bubble is more opportunity to find.
And competition
Right,
in media.
competition. That's what's bad about some of the software companies trying to control, like Facebook or
And
control
they're so huge, and
Yeah.
that's why
Google.
this. I predict that this next wave will be off of those big multimedia platforms like YouTube, the centralized ones that are all
Right.
controlled by big corporations, and back to individual websites where people just go. Like Alex Jones right now, he was kicked off of YouTube and all of the various websites, so he's got his own.
Yeah.
And that's where all of his content's at.
Yeah.
And it's going to be the same with everybody because there's so many witch hunts now. It's hard to keep track of. So you can't put any sort of meaningful content. Well, that's not true, but a lot of the meaningful content that gets put up.
You can't be sure it's going to be able to go through.
Correct.
That's the hard part.
Correct.
It
And
might
eventually,
make it might not.
what's scary is that eventually there are bottlenecks where, like, yeah, you could have your own website, but your internet service provider, if they, if whatever happens, if the same thing that's happening on YouTube and Venmo and PayPal and all these sites where Patreon, where people can collect money, but these entities are big tech and they're far left, and so if you're anything that they disagree with, then you're going to be shut down, and you're not going to be able to use their services, and therefore you're not going to be able to collect your money. You're not going to be able to put your content out there, and so it's a very critical time for free speech right now.
It really is, and it's amazing to me because, of course, I grew up in liberal Seattle, where just the definition of liberal was that you were for free speech.
Yeah. Isn't it incredible how it's changed?
And now, no, it's for correct speech.
Mm-hmm. Approved.
Approved speech. Oh, sad.
Very, very sad.
Yeah.
But maybe we can talk about that another time. It's
Yes.
already been quite a few minutes, maybe hours. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, and just one word is that if you're going to vote, get prepared to vote so you know as much as you can about it between now and when you got to get it in.
That's right. Well, thank you very much, Grandma Suzie. This was fun. And good night.
Good night.